Hey everybody, this is Dave here from Blue Bears Games with another edition of Magic the Gathering Commander before and after. This is the series where I go ahead and give the Commander decks a viewer that I've had for years and give them the much needed and much deserved updates and upgrades for their deck for the cards that are in there. For today's episode, we're going to be doing one of my personal favorites, the one that I played the most back in the day, which is Oloro, the Ageless Ascetic. He is my favorite because if you look at his colors, he is a black, blue, and white commander. And those are the three colors that I like to play personally the most. And I'll show you who he is and what he does. So, he is 6 to cast, 1 black, 1 blue, 1 white, 3 of any. He is a 4/5, and he has, at the beginning of your upkeep, you gain 2 life. Whenever you gain life, you may pay a colorless, and if you do, draw a card, and each opponent loses a life. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, if Oloro Ageless Ascetic is in your command zone, you also gain 2 life. So it's a very heavy life gain deck, mostly on that. There's a few other things in here, but he is pretty good for keeping you alive. So we're going to go over this deck. This deck only has 4 parts to it. It doesn't have as many parts to it as some of the other ones I have, just because he doesn't need as many things. They're more powerful. This deck has more expensive cards in it, so I'm going to go ahead and go over them. So we're going to start with the ramp part. Every commander deck has ramp. This one's no different, and it doesn't have that many, just because it doesn't need it as much because he stays alive and he can kind of last longer. But we start off, obviously, with a Soul Ring. Almost every commander deck should have one. If you don't, you're doing it wrong. Land tax. Like I said, this deck is not as cheap as some of the other ones. Land tax is a 1 to cast enchantment. During your upkeep, if any opponent controls more land than you do, you may search your library, remove up to 3 basic land cards, and put them into your hand, and then reshuffle your library afterwards. In other words, if you start off with this in your opening hand, you go, on your second turn, this is out, it's going to count. What's going to happen is you're going to go get 3 lands. So it kind of helps thin out the deck, and it actually puts them into your hand. So it also gives you a big buff to your hand as well. So I went ahead and start with that, and I'll explain to you the changes that we're going to make before I go ahead and do them, and I'll show you where we're going to go with this deck. There's many options. Up next was Armillary Sphere. It's a 2 cast artifact. 2 tap it, sacrifice it, search your library for 2 basic lands, reveal them, put them into your hand. So I like to get the lands into my hand in this deck. I'd like to put them in play as well, but the options for that are a little different. So next up is Obelisk of Esper. It is the 3 to cast artifact that taps for all 3, for one of the 3 colors that our commander is. It's a 3-color deck. 3-color decks are a little bit harder to do the mana bases for if you don't have the right cards, so this is a perfect addition for that. And then Pristine Talisman is the last ramp that we have. It's a 3 to cast, tap to add a colorless to your mana pool, and then you gain a life. This will stay in here just because it's got a lot of utility. You can tap it to add the 1 colorless you need to gain a life to go ahead and use Oloro's ability. So he's actually just that card is just a 1-card like machine for Oloro. So that's the only ramp we have in here, and that will change a little bit. I'm not too sure how much. I've been going over a lot of cards for this deck. So next up is the defense. Defense isn't all that big in this deck. It's got a little, but it's in white, so we have some of the best cards for multiplayer commander. We'll start off with the Path to Exile. Exile target creature. Its controller may search his or her library for a basic land card and put it on the battlefield tapped. It's an instant, so it's good spot removal. Killing Wave is 1 black and X. For each creature, its controller sacrifices it unless he or she pays X life. You put 5 into this, and for each creature your opponent controls, actually for each creature everybody controls, not just opponent, they have to pay 5 life or they have to sacrifice it. So not too bad. Fog Bank, it's not as good as I was hoping it would work out to be for Commander, but it's a 2 to cast, 0/2 flyer that doesn't receive or deal combat damage. Baleful Strix, it's a black and a blue for a 1/1 flying, death touching, and when he enters the play, draw a card. He's good utility, but he's great for defense. You just put him out there. People target him with spot removal, and you don't really care because you got to draw a card out of it. So he's not too bad for defense. Cap size, anybody playing blue in Commander should probably be playing this if they can get their hands on him. It is 3 to cast with a buyback of 3. So buyback says that you can pay an additional 3 to actually get the card back into your hand after you cast it. And return any permanent to its owner's hand. This is not restricted to non-land like a lot of things that they create today. This says anything, so it can even be land if you need to. Toxic Deluge is one of the better removal cards that this deck has. It was printed in Commander. It was actually one of the reasons why I decided to go with this deck is because Toxic Deluge was huge when it first came out. It's still pretty good today. It's 3 to cast, and as additional cost to cast it, you pay X life. We're playing Oloro, so you're going to be gaining mass amounts of life. And then all creatures get -X/-X. This helps get around indestructible things. So anything that's indestructible, even if it's indestructible, if it has 0 defense, dies. So keep that in mind. Wall of Reverence, this will be getting replaced as most likely most of the creatures, if not all the creatures in this deck, might be getting replaced. I'm probably going to take this into a creatureless direction. But for now, it is a 4 to cast 1/6 defender flying. So it's a wall. And at the beginning of your end step, you may gain life equal to the power of target creature you control. If he's the only creature on the board, it's only 1 life, so it's not that great. We have a disc in here, a Nevinyrral's disc. It is the foil version from the Vault's Relics, 4 to cast. Comes into play tapped, and then when it untaps, you can pay 1 and tap it and destroy basically everything except for it looks like planeswalkers and lands. There might be another thing out there that it can't destroy. I'm trying to think. Let's see. It does enchantments, it does artifacts, it does creatures. As far as permanents go, there's only planeswalkers that I'm aware of, and that's, I think, about it. And I could be wrong, but I think that's about it. Wrath of God, if you don't know what this is and you're playing white, you need to. It's 4 to cast, bury all creatures, and bury. The wording on this, bury, but it basically means they all are destroyed and they can't be regenerated. Supreme Verdict, if you're playing Pioneer, you know all about Supreme Verdict. It's one of the more popular cards, or one of the best cards in Pioneer now. It is 4 to cast, so it's 1 blue, 2 white, 1 of any. It can't be countered, then destroy all creatures. It doesn't have that thing on there that says that it can't be regenerated like Wrath of God, but it can't be countered, so it makes up for it. Sarah Avatar, it's 7 to cast. A little high on the casting cost, but we're playing Commander, so I guess it's okay. It's 3 white, 4 of any. Sarah Avatar's power and toughness is equal to your life total, so it can be pretty big, especially in Oloro. And when it's put into the graveyard from anywhere, you can shuffle it into your library. So it's basically hard to, unless it gets exiled, it's pretty much going to keep coming back. Ashen Rider is a lot. It's 8. It's 2 black, 2 white, 4 of any for a 5/5 flyer. When it enters the battlefield or it dies, you can exile a permanent. Again, expensive, fits into the color theme. I'm probably replacing all the creatures. In this deck, I put in a Kozilek, Butcher of Truth. It's one of the original Eldrazi. It's a 10 to cast, 12/12, and when you cast him, you can draw 4 cards. With Annihilator 4, and then when he is put into a graveyard from anywhere, I can shuffle him into shuffle his or her graveyard into his or her library. So basically, when he dies, he goes into the graveyard, and then you shuffle your library and your graveyard together. So, and then of course Ulamog. I decided that this deck was going to be the bling bling I had back then, so I put the Ulamog in there as well. It's the Infinite Gyre version, 11 to cast for a 10/10. When you cast him, now remember, casting for these is not the same as putting them into play. You have to actually cast them. So when you cast them, you can destroy target permanent. He has Annihilator 4. Annihilator, if I didn't tell you what it was before and you don't know what it is, whenever this creature attacks, defending player has to sacrifice 4 permanents. He's indestructible, which makes him pretty hard to kill. And when he is put into a graveyard from anywhere, its owner shuffles his or her graveyard into his or her library. So those are in there. Those are the defensive cards that I have in here that will be changed a little bit as well. Those cards, I'm thinking of just eliminating the creatures altogether and going creatureless and possibly going the enchantment or the planeswalker route, but I haven't decided yet. The rest of the deck that I have here, most of what's left, I have two more things I'm going to go over. This is the utility part. This deck is basically based on utility. If you haven't noticed, look at how many cards that is. There's utility, and then there's the combos that are your kills for this deck. This deck is almost entirely utility until you can get to your kills. So we're going to go over that. Yeah, first up is Ivory Tower. It's one that casts artifacts from way back in the day. During your upkeep, gain 1 life for each card in your hand above 4. Elixir of Immortality. 1 to cast, 2 tap, sacrifice it, you gain 5 life, and shuffle Elixir of Immortality and your graveyard into their owner's library. So it's kind of like the Eldrazi I just showed you. They just shuffle everything back in. Enlightened Tutor. It's a 1 to cast instant. Search your library for an artifact or enchantment card. Reveal that card. Shuffle your library and then put that card on top of it. It's also the foil version. I don't remember how I attained them, but I do have a playset of foil Enlightened Tutors, and I'm glad I kept them. Bloodchief Ascension, 1 to cast enchantment. It says at the beginning of each end step, remember that's each, if an opponent has lost 2 or more life this turn, you may put a counter on Bloodchief Ascension, and then whenever a card, any, is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere. So if they cast a spell and it goes to the graveyard. If they have a creature die and it goes to the graveyard. Bloodchief Ascension, if it has 3 or more counters on it, you may have that player lose 2 life, and you may gain 2 life. Or actually, it's not even a may. It says, if they lose a life, you gain 2 life. So, the mays are different. This had a semi-Soul Sisters theme to it for utility to gain life. First up is the original one, Soul Warden. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield, gain a life for 1. It's a 1/1. Same thing with Soul's Attendant. It's same thing as Soul. You know, it's the Soul Sisters. 1 to cast 1/1. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield, you may gain a life. The other parts of that were Suture Priest. 2 to cast 1/1. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, gain a life, and whenever a creature enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, they may lose a life. You may have them lose a life. And Blood Artist. 2 to cast 0/1. Whenever Blood Artist or another creature dies, target player loses a life and you gain a life. So you see the whole point of that was just, you know, make it so that if creatures are the important part, you make it to your advantage. Another version is Bloodseeker. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, you may have that player lose a life. So it was kind of like one of those things where I was playing in a group that had a lot of creature-heavy based, like, token stuff. So those worked out really well. It actually ended up killing most people. Swiftfoot Boots, his 2 to cast artifact equipment. Equipped creature has hexproof and haste. That was to protect Oloro when it was needed. Lighthouse Chronologist. This was a weird one. I'm definitely taking him out. But he was a 2 to cast level upper. He was a 1/3 to start. Level up each time I used a blue, he leveled up. And at 4 to 6 counters on him, he was a 2/4. But at 7+, he was at the beginning of each end step. If it's not your turn, take an extra turn at this one. He got annoying quickly for a lot of people, and he was complained about. It was a lot of extra turns on my part. Yes, it's great. Yes, I love it. No, it's not fun for your opponent. An original Demonic Tutor, not the Masters ones. 2 to cast, sorcery, search your library for any card, put it in your hand, and then shuffle your library. Limdol's Vault's a little weird to explain. It's 2 to cast instant. So you look at the top 5 cards of your library as many times as you choose. So you look at the top 5, and then you may pay life to do it again. But what you do with the 5 cards is you put them on the bottom of your library in any order, and then you can look at the next 5 for a life. And shuffle your library afterwards. Now, the reason why I had this card in there is because it came in the pre-con that Oloro came in, and he was good at first. The card is great, don't get me wrong. For what I want to do with this deck, it's not going to work anymore. So you look at the top 5. If you like what you see, you put them back on top of your library. If you don't, you pay life and you put them on the bottom, and then you get to look at another 5, and then put them back on top in any order. It's okay. It's great for setting up your draw, but there's so much stuff out there that I can choose for the 99 for this deck. Archmage's Ascension is 3 to cast at the beginning of each end step. Remember, it's each. If you drew 2 or more cards this turn, you may put a quest counter on it. as long as it has 6 or more counters on it. If you would draw a card, instead search your library for a card, put it in your hand, and then shuffle your library. So what that ends up being is this turns into a demonic tutor every turn after it has 6 counters on it. So it's not bad. This deck, I'm going to change it to make it so that that card gets powered more. Ristic Study. Yes, it's the boogeyman of Commander. It's 3 to cast enchantment whenever an opponent plays a spell. Yeah, I may draw a card unless that player pays 1. Yes, I know. I see the memes. You know, do you pay 1? Do you pay 1? Yes, I'm still keeping it in here. Active Authority is 3 to cast enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, exile target artifact or enchantment. And then it says at the beginning of your upkeep, you may, and this is a may, exile target artifact or enchantment. And if you do, its controller gains control of Active Authority. So you can actually take care of 2 things in one with this, but you lose control of it. And then they have the opportunity to go ahead and do the same thing. At the beginning of their upkeep, they may be able to exile an artifact or enchantment. So keep that in mind. It does move. Alright, Chalice of Life. This is one of those cards that I'm like, at the time it was good. Now I don't think so. So it is a 3 to cast artifact that you tap it to gain a life. Then if you have at least 10 more life than your starting total, you can flip it. And when you transform it or flip it, it turns into tapped. Target player loses 5 life. It actually, sadly, I hate to admit this, but this card actually has won me 2 games way back in the day, just because it's just a direct tap to make an opponent lose 5 life. I'm still thinking about taking it out because there's other things. Sphinx's Revelation, 2 blue, 1 of any, and X. It's essentially a Stroke of Genius, but with white in it. It says, and you get to gain life with it. You gain X life and draw X cards, and it's an instant. Not a horrible card. I'm going to think hard about this, and it may stay in, but I'm not sure. Trading Post. It's a 4 to cast artifact. For 1 and tap, you can discard a card and gain 4 life. For 1 and tap, you can pay a life and put an 0-1 goat into play. And we know I love goats. Putting them into play is just funny. You can pay 1 tap, sacrifice a creature, return target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. That's an important step here because a lot of the artifacts are recurring. Then you've got 1 tap, sacrifice an artifact, and draw a card. So it loops around for different things if you want them. It's utility, and it's good. It helps you with a lot of things, and it's also foil. Clone. If you don't know what clone is by now, you're probably not playing Magic long. It's just a 4 to cast creature that when it comes into play, you can copy a creature. That's what all that text says. Back in the revised text was a little longer. ETH coming out. I don't know, how to do it. I know how I'm going to do it, but I don't know what I'm going to do it with. Rite of Replication, 4 to cast sorcery with a kicker of 5. Put a token on the battlefield with a copy of target creature. And if it was kicked, put 5 of those tokens instead, so you can get a nice little army out of this card. He's on the block too, just because I'm thinking of the enchantment theme or the planeswalker theme with him. Foff, or Fact of Fiction, 4 to cast instant, foily 2. Real top 5 cards of your library, and opponent separates those cards into 2 face-up piles. Put one of them into your, put one pile into your hand and the other into your graveyard. Good utility there. Erebos, the God of the Dead, 4 to cast legendary enchantment creature. God, he's a 5/7 and indestructible. If your devotion is less than 5, he is not a creature. Devotion for you, that for those of you if you don't know, means that you count the mana symbols on the battlefield that you control, and if there's not 5 mana symbols or more, he is not a creature. The abilities for him, I don't want him to be a creature anyway, just because he's more vulnerable that way, even though he's indestructible. As an enchantment, he's much better. Your opponents can't gain life, and for 1 black, 1 of any, and 2 life, draw a card. I've had him out many games where he is the deciding factor on who wins and who loses, just because some people have to gain life to live, and some people don't like it when you draw cards. So he has affected many games. Next up is Jace the Mind Sculptor. I'm going to shock you guys, but he may be coming out. As good as he is, he doesn't fit as well into the theme of this deck as I was hoping. His 4 to cast, 3 loyalty when he comes into play. 4 abilities. +2 is look at the top card of target player's library, and you may put it on the bottom of that player's library. For 0, you basically brainstorm, which is draw 3 cards, and put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library. For -1, you can return target creature to its owner's hand, and -12, basically you win the game. -12 is exile all cards from target player's library. Then that player shuffles his or her hand into his or her library. Okay, so it basically says your opponent's deck turns into whatever was in their hand, and if they have no cards in their hand, they lose the game pretty much. Yeah, he's probably coming out just because it's great, but he's too low of loyalty. He's too easy to get rid of. And I have some other additions to this deck that I want to try. Next up is Soren. Soren I like. I may keep him. I wish he had more loyalty to start with, but, you know, back in the day, loyalty was harder to enter the battlefield with. Soren, Lord of Innistrad, is 4. 1 black, 1 white, 2 of any. 3 loyalty to start. His first uptick is put a 1/1 black vampire creature token with lifelink onto the battlefield, so create a 1/1 lifelinking vampire. His -2 is you get an emblem with creatures you control, get +1/+0. I probably would never use that. This is just to help create tokens to help, you know, to have blockers. And then the -6, which is his ultimate, destroy up to 3 target creatures and or other planeswalkers, and return each of those, each card put into a graveyard this way to the battlefield under your control. Basically, he steals. It's kind of like the original version of Oko, where he steals things. His -6 just says, destroy 3 creatures and their planeswalkers, and then you get them. So I'm thinking about keeping him. I like that. Polluted Bonds is a 5 to cast enchantment from Lorwyn, it looks like. Whenever a land comes into play under an opponent's control, a player loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. Let's just be honest. This card is a motherfucker. He is an ass. So, it does a lot of damage and you gain a lot of life off of it, because a lot of people and a lot of lands being played equals a lot of life and a lot of damage. People hate him. People hate that card a lot. Shattered Angel is 5 to cast 3/3 flyer, and when a land enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, you may gain 3 life. Again, I might be taking most of the creatures out of this deck. I might go creatureless. I'm thinking about it, and there's a lot of good choices. Soren Markov, everybody hates. He's a 6 to cast planeswalker that comes into play with 4 loyalty. His +2 is he deals 2 damage to target creature or player, and you gain 2 life. Not bad. His -3 is what everybody hates. Target opponent's life total becomes 10. Doesn't matter if they're at 1,000,000 life, it just becomes 10. People hate this card. His ultimate, which I don't ever think I use, I think it's always just make somebody at 10 life, is you control target player's next turn. It's good, but that's not what he's for. It's just to make target player go to 10 from wherever they're at. Elspeth, the Sun's champion, is a 6 to cast planeswalker with 4 loyalty to start. +1 is put 3 1/1 soldiers into play. So it creates 3 1/1 soldiers. It's just for defense. It helps because, it literally is 3 creatures in 1 shot. It's kind of useful. Especially if you like doing the Soul Sisters thing that I'm doing. So 3 creatures come in, you gain 3 life. If you pay 3, you get 3 cards as well because Oloro is out. Her -3 is destroy all creatures with power 4 or greater. Extremely useful. Extremely useful. A lot of people like to show their power and how big they can make their creatures, and she just says, okay, they die. And her ultimate is you get an emblem with creatures you control, get +2/+2 and have flying. Kind of important in Commander because you have so many opponents. You just want to make sure you can cover all your bases, all your things that, you know, are in the deck that are creatures or have the ability to make creatures. Making them flying is kind of important so your opponent doesn't just fly over your head. Alright, Asperia, the Supreme Judge, is expensively 8. It's a 6/4 flyer. Whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, you may draw a card. Again, I'm probably taking all the creatures out of here. If I have any creatures left, they'll just be so utility that I couldn't leave them out. He may be coming out. Same thing with Harvester of Souls, even though it's really a good card. He's one of the ones I'm talking about. 6 to cast, 5/5 Death Toucher, and whenever a non-token creature dies, you may draw a card. That doesn't mean like it's anybody's creature, and if it's not a token and it dies, doesn't matter when it dies, how it died, who controls it. You may draw a card. It helps fill your hand. It's actually been pretty good. Carn Liberated, the original Carn Planeswalker, I guess. 7 to cast for 6 loyalty to start. +4, by the way, is target player exiles a card from his or her hand. The -3 is exile target permanent. And the ultimate is -14, basically restart the game. I would never use that because that's just stupid. But the exiling cards from player's hand and exiling permanents from, play, that's kind of important. He may get replaced with the newer versions. I'm not sure yet. But he's pretty good. Good utility. Magister Sphinx. It is a foil as well. Look at that. That's a nice foil, actually. He is an expensive 7 to cast. 5/5 flyer. When it comes into play, target player's life total becomes 10. So basically, he's like the Soren Markov, but on a creature. And it says whenever he comes into play, so if he blinks, you can do it again. He's in there for that reason, but unfortunately, I'm honestly thinking of taking every single creature out, and he is included. Same thing with Sphinx of the Steel Wind. He is also 8, so 1, 1, and 1, and 5. So 1 black, 1 blue, 1 white, and 5. For a 6/6 flying. First strike, vigilance, lifelink, pro red, pro green. He's defense, he's utility, he's everything. He's also coming out. Not bad, but he's got to come out. Now this one may be the one creature that stays in there because he's not really here for be a creature. Jin Cataxis, the Core Augur. 10 to cast. It's expensive. 2 blue, 8 of any. For a 5/4 that has flash. So I can cast him anytime I want in the game. At the beginning of my end step, I draw 7 cards. Each opponent's maximum hand size is reduced by 7. So, it basically means that you can have you draw 7 cards and your opponents can only have a maximum hand size of 0. Unless they have something that does differently or says differently. They are not allowed to have cards in their hand by the end of their turn. It's nice utility. It's pretty good. I'm not 100% sure if I'm going to keep him in here, but he's worth a spot just because he changes the tide of the game. And of course, the quintessential blue card you must play in Commander just to make things interesting is Omniscience. 10 to cast enchantment. You just cast non-land cards from your hand without paying their mana costs. Why that's important for this deck is because everything in here has or not everything, but a lot of the things in here have when you cast it, blah, blah, blah stuff, you get an effect, and if it just comes into play, it doesn't give you the effect. Well, this says you cast it without, basically you cast everything for free. So it's still being cast just because the casting cost was reduced doesn't mean it wasn't cast. So this may stay in there. Like I said, I'm thinking of going the enchantment theme route. So, now, that's all for utility, that's all for defense, that's all the ramp. Let's do the kill. There are 2 or 3 ways that I'm going to go ahead and kill, and I'll show you what they are right now. We're going to start off with what looks to be an unseeming card, Viscopa Guildmage. He's a redundancy, and I'll show you why in a second. He's a 2 to cast, 2/2. That for 3, target creature gains lifelink in the turn. We don't use that. For 3, whenever you gain life this turn, each opponent loses that much life. That's a redundancy for another card that's part of it. It's part of an infinite combo kill. We're going to actually skip that and that and that for now. We're going to go to the kill and then I'll show you that later. So, Exquisite Blood. Whenever an opponent loses life, you gain that much life. Here's the combo. So for 5, whenever an opponent, it's an enchantment, so it stays in play. Whenever an opponent loses life, you gain that much life, and if you have him active, whenever you gain life, each opponent loses that much life. It loops. So if they lose a life, you gain a life. When you gain a life, they lose a life. It keeps going. The redundancy is the Sanguine Bond. It's the same thing as the Viscopa Guildmage, but in enchantment form. So for 5, whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. So you can infinitely loop this so that 1 damage equals infinite damage. So, the difference between Sanguine Bond and Viscopa Guildmage is that whenever you gain life this turn, each opponent loses that much life. Whereas Sanguine Bond says target, but the problem is it doesn't matter if you target it, you know, for one part of it, you can just change the target. So it doesn't really matter when the infinite loop goes off. Okay? So that's part of it. Now, the other part of it, mind over matter with the following. And I'll show you what mind over matter is. Mind over matter is 4 blue and 2 of any. You can choose and discard a card. Tap or untap target artifact, creature, or land. Okay? Those of us who have been playing for a while know the Tolarian Academy deck from the days of yore, where you had a land that produced a pretty decent amount of mana. You're able to draw cards to fill your hand, or your hand was full. You're able to tap it for mana, untap it by discarding a card, tap it for mana, and then discard another card to untap it, and it was a loop that kept going. It's the same theory with this deck, and when I go over the lands, I'll show you the lands that use it. So, it's basically the old Mind Over Matter Tolarian Academy theory without a Tolarian Academy, okay? With all that mana, you're going to do a couple of things. You can Exsanguinate, which is 2 black and X. Each opponent loses X life, and you gain life equal to the life lost this way. You can Debt to the Deathless, which is the same thing as Exsanguinate, but for white-black, and each opponent loses 2 times X life, and you gain life. Or we're going to go with Scholar of Erebos. Okay, this is a creature, 1/4 for 3, that for 1 black and 2 of any, each opponent loses a life, and you gain life equal to the life lost this way. So those are 3 versions of cards that go with the Mind Over Matter theory. You can create infinite mana, or at least enough mana to kill your opponent with one of the X spells or a Scholar of Erebos. Or Athreos, actually. Scholar of Athreos. That's one of the 2 ways that you can go ahead and kill. So you've got the infinite loop of Viscopa Guildmage or Sanguine Bond with Exquisite Blood. Or we have the Mind Over Matter theory, where you can go ahead and create a whole bunch of mana and then just X out your opponent with Exsanguinate or Debt to the Deathless. So those are the 2 current ways that you can go ahead and kill your opponent. We're trying to survive long enough with you know, Oloro. You're going to survive long enough to get that combo off, one of the 2. Okay? And I'm going to go over the lands, and I'll tell you what we're going to try and change it to. So it's a 3-color deck. Command Tower is a must. I know you always play Command Tower and Commander. Doesn't matter if it's a 1-color or 2-color deck, 3-color deck. But really important in a 3-color deck. Arcane Sanctum, it comes into play tapped and tapped for one of the 3 colors that your commander is, so he's absolutely a useful card. Dromar's Caverns. It's essentially the same thing as the Arcane Sanctum, but it's a lair. So it's a lair in addition to any other land type. When it comes into play, sacrifice it unless you return a non-lair land you control to its owner's hand, so you have to bounce a land back to your hand, and he taps to add one of the 3 colors of your commander. So it's not horrible. I'm glad I found it. It actually is helpful for this deck. Now, I said that we're doing one of the combos in here is the old Tolarian Academy style, like you have to produce lots of mana. For this current version, Nykthos Shrine to the Nyx is one of them. So Nykthos adds 1 colorless, or you can play 2 and tap it and choose a color and add to your mana pool an amount of mana equal to your devotion to that color. So if you have, when you have like an Omniscience out or a Mind Over Matter, there's 4 blue symbols in those, or 3 blue symbols in those. So you're gaining mana. Like if you have Mind Over Matter out with a Nykthos, you pretty much can win the game right there if you have a kill card. You can produce infinite mana right there. You just have to be able to draw cards, but there's a couple of ways to draw cards in here, because if you gain life, you can draw a card from Oloro. So that's one of the ways to do it. There's another way, which is Cabal Coffers. It's 2 tap, add a black to your mana pool for each swamp you control. So there's a couple ways, and you want the black, and you want the blue, and you want to be able to use any of the colors you want at your disposal. So that was the other part to the Mind Over Matter style combo for like the Tolarian Academy style combo. Reliquary Tower is also in there because you're going to be drawing a lot of cards. You want to be able to have no maximum hand size, so it's just in there for that, no other reason. So you don't have a max, like your hand size doesn't matter. Tectonic Edge is to get rid of opposing lands that are a problem. It's 1 tap, destroy target non-basic land, and activate only if an opponent controls 4 or more lands. Same thing with the Ghost Quarter. It's sacrifice it, and you destroy target land. It doesn't have to be non-basic, it just has to be any land, and its controller may search their library for a basic land card and put it on the battlefield. Some of these may change. I have some interesting ideas to change these out to. Esper Panorama. It's 1 tap, sacrifice it, search the library for a basic plains, island, or swamp, and put on the battlefield tapped. It's it's better than a faux fetch, but not really a fetch. Yes, this deck was my baby for the longest time, so you will see some really expensive stuff coming up. First one, my Underground Sea. I do have a playset of these, so I've divided them out into multiple decks. So this deck was one of the ones that got it. If you don't know what a sea is, go learn. Watery Grave, the Shockland version of an Underground Sea. Yes. Now the only thing I'm mad about is I don't have a foil one of these, or if I do, I didn't put it in here. I did do it with the Drowned Catacomb though. Enters the battlefield tapped unless you control an island or a swamp. As you can see, I have plenty of good stuff to go in there with this island or swamp, so it should come into play untapped. And yes, that is foil. Polluted Delta, the original. Fetch land, pay life, sacrifice it, blah blah blah. Search for a swamp or an island. Yeah, the original one. Still, I don't have a foil one of those. I wish I did. This one's coming out, but for utility instead of for color. Dark Water Catacombs is one of the filter lands. One colorless, tap it, add a blue and a black. It's probably going to come out. Tundra. It is the dual land for blue-white. Counts as a plains and an island. Hallowed Fountain, same thing. It's the Shockland version of a Tundra. And of course, Glacial Fortress in foil. Comes into play tapped unless you control a plains or an island. Taps to add a blue or a white. Flooded Strand. I don't have an original one, so this is the Consecure fetch land for blue-white. Scrubland, yes, I told you I put some money into this deck. I did get this a long time ago. It's the black-white dual land. Same thing with Gala Shrine. It is the Shockland version of a Scrubland. Isolated Chapel, same thing as the other ones. It comes into play tapped to let you control plains or a swamp. Marsh Flats, the fetch land for that. I do have all that. And then the rest of it is just basic land. Now, I'm going to put some utility into this deck when it comes to the lands as well. That is basically the whole deck in a nutshell. My plan for this deck is I'm going to change this over to, most likely, an enchantment and planeswalker version of itself without any creatures. And I'm going to make it all utility without creatures, okay? Because Oloro says, you may pay 1 whenever you gain life to draw a card, I can take, I don't have to have the original, like, the basic draw card spells in here because he's going to do it himself. He gains life himself, he helps you draw cards, so this deck is going to get a huge overhaul. When I say that huge overhaul, I actually started working on the upgrades for this deck 2 weeks before I made this video. Because there are so many options, especially in the colors that he is, that I really have to go over a lot of stuff. I want to make this the premier deck that I own. I have another deck that's 3 colors that I like a lot, but this is my favorite color scheme. And I'm going to take my time on this one, so hopefully I can get it within, I usually like to space these out, part 1 and part 2, 2 weeks apart. This one may take me longer. I'm hoping to get it out, and if I don't, we'll see. But either way, this is part 1. This is the original deck for Oloro. And hopefully when I go to make these changes, you'll like what you see. I'm so far liking a lot of the changes that I can make. So for now, that is all I've got for you. Don't forget to go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Go ahead and like the video. Share it out to your friends, your family, whoever plays Magic. This one's an interesting deck, and I know that they're going to like it as much as I do, especially if you like the 3 colors that he, blue, black, and white. Most people do. It's one of the more popular combinations. So go ahead, and like I said, any comments or questions you got, go ahead and put them below. And I will see you next time for Magic the Gathering Commander Before and After. Thanks, and have a good day.